Prison is bad, but at least you have some time to hang out with your homies and come up with cool handshakes. Well, that's the case if they don't lock you away in some hole forever, never to be seen again. Every now and again there's a prisoner who will never see the light of day because the prison guards throw them away in a cell to be forgotten about. We're talking about solitary confinement. Hello again, Most Amazing Top 10 family. I'm your host, Chad Arena, and welcome back to Most Amazing Top 10. For today's list, we are going to be counting down the top 10 prisoners who spent the most time in solitary confinement. For anyone at home who wants some more top 10 content, you should check us out on Instagram and Facebook, and stick around until the end of this video because I'm going to be answering some questions from my Instagram inbox. If you want me to answer your question, you can hit me up through the gram, and without taking any longer, let's get into this list. Coming in at number 10, we have Steve Selvin. We're going to kick off this list, of course not with the longest stay in solitary confinement, but someone who ended up there for one of the craziest reasons you will ever hear. Steve Selvin was driving home one day and then he got pulled over by the police and they thought he had been drinking. They arrested him and then took him to jail. Now, if you get arrested for a DUI, what do you think would be the next course of action? Well, you probably get your one phone call and then everything would be set up so you eventually stand trial. Well, that's not the case here. Steve was thrown into a jail cell, but some of the other people in there thought that he might try to take his own life. The guards wanted to prevent this, so they put him in solitary confinement. I don't really understand the correlation. You're worried about someone's mental health, so you lock them up in a cage by themselves. And this was all before Steve Selvin had the opportunity to stand trial. After this, he was then left in solitary confinement for 2 years. 2 years rotting away in a cell without any justice taking place. Thankfully, one day he was released and he sued the city and was awarded $15 million. Coming in at number 9, we have George Martrano. I didn't know this, but you can be sentenced to solitary confinement right from the get-go. I thought you had to do something while you were in prison to be shoved into a hole like that. I guess it makes sense for some prisoners, if it seems like they could be a danger to the other people in there, or if it seems like the prisoners want to kill them as soon as they step foot in the prison. As a judge, you would want to prevent that from happening. But in the case of George Martrano, he was sentenced to 4.5 years in solitary confinement, and that was just a chunk of his 32-year sentence. After 4.5 years in solitary confinement, you would either come out a monk, use this time to become enlightened, or you would go insane. The wildest part about George being sentenced to 4.5 years in solitary confinement was that he was a non-violent offender. He was arrested for drug possession. And you might think, well, he broken the law, then he should go to jail. Well, what about all those bankers that broke the law and caused the global economy to crash back in 2008 that saw 0 jail time? Doesn't seem like the system is fair. Coming at number 8, we have Daniel Trigila. Daniel was already locked up in prison, but his sentence got a whole lot worse when he was accused of being associated with a gang while in prison, which is something people do just to survive because the prison system is so dangerous. He was given 8.5 years in solitary confinement. He described his stay as something that will either make you or break you. You don't get to talk to anyone, you don't get to have a phone call with your family, you don't even get to have social time in the yard with the other inmates. And when you get released from your cell for the allotted hour a day, you don't get to go to some place that is covered with grass and then you can see the outdoors. You go to a brick room that is slightly bigger than your cell so you can move around a little bit. The only nature that he would see was the occasional bug that would crawl into the corner of his cell. Coming in number 7, we have Ianmanuel. This is a wild story because I don't know how you deal with something like this. Ianmanuel was sentenced to 65 years in prison because he murdered a woman. I mean, you kill someone, you should go to prison, right? There's not really a workaround on this. Well, he was 13 years old when he did this. To say that someone would be the same at 13 and even 5 years later is just untrue. How does a 13-year-old even get his hands on a gun to kill someone? There is so much gray area on this. He became the youngest person ever to be sentenced to a men's prison. I think because of his age they were trying to protect him, and he was sentenced to 18 years in solitary confinement. He was sentenced to more years in solitary than he had even been alive. Coming in at number 6, we have the Man in the Iron Mask. This story is a legend that has been somewhat lost in time, but people to this day have been trying to find out who the Man in the Iron Mask was. He was taken into prison in 1669 and he stayed in a cell by himself until he died in 1703. The question is, why did this prisoner have to wear a mask the entire time? What could he have done to be forced to wear a mask day in and day out, be kept in a cell by himself, and there was an order to kill him if he ever took off his mask? This was when King Louis XIV was in power. power, and people think that the man in the iron mask could have been his older brother who was the rightful heir to the throne. That is why no one was allowed to see his face. Coming in at number 5, we have Sam Mendes. It seems that Ianmanuel wasn't the only one who was sent to a maximum security prison when he was only a kid. Sam Mendes was convicted of killing a woman when he was only 14 years old. He was sentenced to life in prison without the opportunity for parole, and through his stay in prison he was thrown in and out of solitary. The wild thing is, if you go back and revisit the case, there's almost zero evidence linking him to the murder of this woman. They might have taken away this kid's life and he didn't even do anything wrong. Thankfully, because he was locked up at such a young age, his case was revisited and he was later released from prison. But this was after 26 years in prison. Because he was in and out of solitary confinement, his mother said it had almost been 10 years since she last saw her son. Coming in at number 4, we have Jesse Pomeroy. This story is almost something of legend, and unlike most of the people on this list, it made sense why they would lock this guy away in solitary confinement. Jesse Pomeroy was arrested at age 14 for murdering a ton of kids. He was taken to a juvenile corrections facility where he killed more kids, and then he was locked up in a cell for the rest of his life. Coming in at number 3, we have Robert King. Robert King was one of 3 members of the Angola 3 who were locked up way back in the 70s. They were convicted of killing a corrections officer, and from day one, the 3 of them were thrown in solitary confinement. Out of the 3, Robert was the luckiest. I know that sounds crazy, but when you hear what happened to the other 2 members, you will know what I'm talking about. Robert spent 29 years in solitary confinement, day in and day out. He was supposed to serve the rest of his life in there, but when his case was revisited, there was a ton of information that didn't add up, and his case was overturned. He was able to walk out of there a free man after taking a plea deal. Coming in at number 2, we have Herman Wallace, the second member of the Angola 3. Herman wasn't as lucky as Robert. His section of the case didn't get the same treatment, but there was a massive protest to have him removed from prison because it was clear that the information given was a little fishy. Eventually, Amnesty International got involved, and then they pushed to have him removed from prison when he was dying from liver cancer. The man was 71 years old at this point and quite possibly was in prison for a crime that he didn't commit. He was out of prison 2 days before he died from his cancer. This was after spending 40 years in solitary confinement. And at the number 1 spot is Albert Woodfox, the final member of the Angola 3. Albert Woodfox spent 45 years in solitary confinement for a crime that he says he never committed. Albert and Herman were originally locked up for armed robbery, and while they were getting their papers for their sentencing in the prison, there was a story floating around about a corrections officer who had been killed in the prison. And before you know it, they were accused of the murder, and for the next 45 years, Albert would spend it in a prison cell by himself. They pinned the crime on him, and it doesn't seem like it was a crime that he actually committed. He was later released after the case was revisited and he took a plea deal, but he did say he would like to take it back to court so he could prove his innocence. Alright everyone, that has been our list, and as promised, I'm going to be reading out some questions from my Instagram inbox. A1100 gang wrote in and asked, "Where are you from?" I'd tell you guys I'm half Haitian and a whole lot of white stuff just all mixed in there. I'm not really sure all the details on the white side, but I do know there's some Dutch in there, so I should probably go to Holland and check out what my roots are like and see what that place has to offer. Emily Satch88 wrote in and asked, "Do you have any tattoos?" And the answer is no, I don't have any tattoos. Although I have thought about it for a bit when I was younger, but I'm so indecisive with tattoos that I don't think I should ever get them. I do really like tattoos though. I think they can look amazing on a person, and I do find it very attractive when a girl has tattoos like all over her body. But personally for me, I think I'm too old to start, and it's kind of rare to find someone who has 0 tattoos on their body, so I kind of want to keep that. And finally, Bizino, I'm not really sure how to say that, wrote in and asked, "Who's your celebrity crush?" And there are 2 famous ladies that it will forever have a place in my heart. The first is Scarlett Johansson, I mean with her red hair and the Black Widow tight spandex. Come on, every nerd loves that. But she's also absolutely gorgeous, and my other celebrity crush isn't as well known, but I've always had a thing for Gina Carano. If you don't know her, she used to be a pro MMA fighter, but the first time I saw her was when she was on the show American Gladiators when I was like 17. But she was also Cara Dune in The Mandalorian. But she has the best smile I have ever seen in my life. When I see a picture of her smiling, I get those like little cartoon hearts floating around my head like, oh, whoa, Gina Carano. Alright everyone, that has been our list. Thank you all so much for tuning in. As always, I'd love it if you could like, comment, subscribe, and hit the little notification bell. Until next time, I've been your host, Jay Arena, and hey, try to stay out of prison. Bye.